They just don't win postseason games in Buffalo. That's all there is to it. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down Buffalo's loss to Troy in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl in Boise, of course, on the blue turf. Let's break it down. 42-32 game. Pretty entertaining game. Did not go down to the wire, so I have deemed, if you checked out the other video, I deemed the Wake Forest win over Memphis in the Birmingham Bowl on the final play of the game and the missed field goal after a third consecutive try, 37-34, as the best bowl game to date. This would probably be second 42-32 game, but Buffalo pretty much couldn't catch up in the second half after getting down by 2 scores. And I allude to Buffalo's sports issues from a football standpoint. I don't care about the NHL. I don't pay attention to it. I guess the Sabres, I know that they were awful at one point for a long time. I have no idea what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years. But, of course, the Bills, the last time they had a chance to win a postseason game in the NFL was the Music City Miracle in 1999. Prior to that, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you can look this up, I believe their last postseason win was against Dan Marino and the Miami Dolphins in the wild card game in 1994 or 5 in Buffalo. And the Buffalo Bulls have never won a bowl game. So this is how this one shook out. It was pretty even first half. Buffalo led 17-14. Then it was a very odd third quarter because Troy had 2 long touchdown drives, and they would have had 3. They could have completely run away with this game. So they had 2 touchdown drives. The first drive of the third quarter, touchdown. And then Buffalo had to punt. Then Troy scores another touchdown. And then they had an onside kick in there in which they scored the other touchdown. So they had 2 long touchdown drives plus the onside kick. So Buffalo didn't touch the ball. And then on the third time after the onside kick in which they had the ball, Troy did, they went 93 yards, or they went down to the 7-yard line. I don't know. They drove it about 65 or 75 yards, and but they fumbled. And let's see, it was James Patterson with a forced fumble, and Tyrone Hill for the Bulls went 93 yards for a touchdown to make it a game once again at 28-24. This ball game could have been 35-17 as Troy was going in for another touchdown, a third touchdown of the third quarter, but instead Buffalo's defense stood up with the big play and the 93-yard return to make it 28-24. Troy did then score to make it 35-24, and Buffalo couldn't quite catch up. It was 35-30, and that's where they had their chance. This is pretty much where the game changed. It was a 35-32 game as Buffalo tacked on the 2-point conversion down 35-24. They get the touchdown, 35-32 Troy. 3.5 minutes left in the game. Buffalo's got the ball at its own 20. Tyreek Jackson, very fun player to watch, very explosive, very powerful quarterback. 20 of 35 on this day, 274 yards with a touchdown and a pick. Was forced from the pocket, and sometimes these really athletic quarterbacks, especially if they're big and strong and can throw guys off so they can make guys miss, but they can also throw some guys off, they get into trouble, and that's what happened with Jackson on this play. He got flushed left after he dodged about 18 guys and threw them off of his back. He went left, and he held on the ball too long, should have gotten rid of the ball. And, man, Antoine Barker, who's a really good player for Troy on defense, and he's going to be back next year, I believe, he lowered the boom on Jackson, forced the fumble, and Troy Hunter Reese came up with it. So 3 minutes left to play. Buffalo's trying to start a drive. Jackson fumbles. Troy takes over at the Buffalo 20, up 35-32. First play, they take the wideout, Sidney Davis. This was his only carry of the game. They bring him in motion. They stop him behind the line. They have the motion going right, boom, up the middle, big gasher, touchdown, 20-yard touchdown run, and that basically was the end of the game. Davis had 4 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown, but he had just the 1 carry for 20 yards, but that was the big touchdown to seal it at 42-32. Buffalo had a chance. They drove down the field. They lined up for a field goal, so they could have made it 42-35, get within a touchdown, and then, of course, go for the onside kick. But they had the field goal blocked. And I don't know if this is Troy so much making a great play, because Buffalo has had 8 field goals blocked this year. This is a team that came within 1 point of winning the MAC championship. They blew a huge lead in the game by 20-plus points and lost it 30-29. Won 10 games, and they had 8 field goals blocked. That led FBS play by a pretty wide margin, I believe. And so there's your ball game. 42-32, Troy wins. Winning 10-plus games for a third consecutive season. What a job Neil Brown has done with the Troy Trojans. They finish at 10-3. Okay, coming back in 2019, Sawyer Smith hit 31 of 44 passes in this game, 320 yards and 4 touchdowns, but he was not the starter. Caleb Parker's coming back. So it's going to be Parker versus Smith. Sawyer Smith, Caleb Parker, who hit on 73% of his passes with 10 touchdowns and 2 picks. They will battle it out for the starting quarterback position. Damian Willis, after a huge game in the bowl game, 13 catches for 101 yards and a couple touchdowns, 56 receptions on the season and 10 touchdowns. He's gone. Okay, B.J. Smith, he had the one big fumble that was taken back for 93 yards, but he also ran for 93 yards in this game and had a big season of almost 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns. B.J. Smith will be back for his senior season at Troy. DeAndre Douglas, Sidney Davis, 2 excellent receivers, reliable, caught 91 passes total between them. They're both gone. On the defensive side for Troy, the one big loss is Hunter Reese. We talked about him making the big play on defense that sealed the deal. He recovered the fumble off the Tyreek Jackson strip sack. He had 14.5 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks. He will not be back, but these guys will be. For the Troy Trojans, Jarvis Hayes will be a senior next year, 10.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks this year. Tron Folsom, a senior, 82 total tackles, 9 for loss. Carlos Marshall, coming into his sophomore season as a freshman, he had 76 total tackles and 9 tackles for loss. This is the Troy non-conference schedule. There is no trip to Death Valley to try to upset LSU once again, as they famously did last season. They've got games against Campbell and Southern Miss to start the season. Then they go to Akron. They do play an SEC foe at Columbia, Missouri when they take on the Tigers. All right, for Buffalo, still with no bowl wins in its history, but they were a laughingstock forever, and now they're good. They return most of the offense but lose 8 defensive starters. Quarterback Tyreek Jackson, 28 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He's been pretty much the starter since his freshman year, a 3-year starter. He will be back for his senior season with 7 touchdowns rushing. Jared Patterson, almost 1,000 yards, finished just 22 yards shy of 1,000 this year and 14 touchdowns as a freshman. He'll be back, of course. Anthony Johnson gone after a 57-catch and 1,000-yard season and 11 touchdowns. KJ Osborne will come into his senior season, having caught 53 this year and 7 touchdowns. He's back. Antonio Nunn comes back. He only caught 8 passes during the regular season, but showed up big in the bowl game with 4 catches and 87 yards. 3 big players going on defense. You got Khalil Hodge, who had 143 tackles. He's gone. Cornerback Brandon Williams, after 64 tackles this year and 5 interceptions in his career. He graduates along with Charles Harris, who had 22 tackles for loss and 12 sacks in his career. Back are James Patterson, 77 tackles and 9 tackles for loss, and Taylor Riggins with 6.5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks are back for Buffalo. Their 2019 schedule lines up like this in non-conference play. Robert Morris at Penn State, at Liberty, and a game against Temple as well. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Dollar General Bowl, of course, with Buffalo and Troy, and the Trojans win a bowl game once again this year, winning over the Bulls 42-32. We'll have more breakdowns coming up. Previews of the Power 5 really gets into play. We've only seen Wake out of the ACC and Arizona State out of the Pac-12 thus far. And the day after Christmas, we've got Boston College and others in play as the Eagles take on Boise State to kick off play on December 26th, right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.